let's dive into the Shedeur Sanders
Yeah, we
conversation a
have
little
to.
bit more, because this was the number one storyline coming in. It remains the number one storyline heading into the later rounds. And listen, like, teams with quarterback needs are going to be drafting early in the second round. The Browns, for example, Cleveland Browns
Please
could be
don't.
one of them. And I just think that, it's a tough situation to be in for Shedeur. It's not necessarily his fault that he was being projected the way that he was being talked about the way that he was. I will say he certainly handled and wanted to be in the spotlight. His dad said he was going to be a top 5 pick, like tweeted all of this out, would get on people about it. So it's not like he is fully blameless for creating or being part of the hype cycle. But I do think one of the questions was Shedeur Sanders realistically a top first round type talent, regardless of the draft, but especially this draft, right? Where there weren't a lot of quarterbacks that we were talking. Like, I still think Cam Ward would have gone behind all of the first round quarterbacks last year. The question about Shedeur is, like, was he ever supposed to be that? I mean, obviously the way that people talked about it, Mel Kiper talked about him and compared him to all of these Hall of Famers.
Right.
But is that even fair? Was that even realistic? Is this really a drop? Or is this where he was going to go all along, not a first day guy?
Yeah, and we've got a tweet up right now for folks that are watching from our colleague Chris Sims. He said it's not fair to Shedeur to label this as a fall. It never should have been considered as a top 5 pick. The hype was created before NFL people were really able to dig into the film. Very few, if any, NFL teams had first round grade, and that's fine. He can still be good. And I think it's interesting because, to his point, like, we finished the season and it's like Cam Ward and Shedeur, clearly the top 2 guys, yada, yada, yada. But I think that was always with the context of what you said, is none of these guys were stacking up with the guys that we saw from a year ago. I probably still would have had a first round grade on him because of the things that I value that the great NFL quarterbacks do that Shedeur does. I also think if you didn't have a first round grade on Shedeur Sanders, it's hard for me to justify a first round grade on Jackson Dart, because again, Jackson Dart wouldn't have been in the conversation with any of the dudes from last year. He wasn't in the conversation with Cam Ward, who went 20 odd picks before him. So I just want to put that there. You mentioned something that I think is intriguing, because there are 2 sides of this conversation when it comes to Shedeur Sanders. There is the personality, locker room fit, team guy conversation, and then there's the athletic traits and quarterback play conversation. As we got closer to the draft, we had the anonymous personnel people, which I hate these reports when they try to kill kids and they don't put their name on it. And I'd be perfectly fine if they did it and they put their name on it, but they don't. Where they're like, it's the worst interview I've ever seen. He's very immature, yada, yada, yada. First off, I'm not exactly sure from ever watching Shedeur Sanders operate that he would be great in the interview setting. He is like his father, where he says what he wants to say, and it might not always be the thing that you want to hear, but he is honest, and that's just what it is. And you have to make a decision. Not fine if you say that's not for your locker room, but you have to make that decision. The maturity thing, I think, is overblown, because I think we could ask the same questions about Caleb Williams and his maturity from a year ago. 2 kids who made a ton of NIL money, 2 kids who were in the spotlight. They're driving the big expensive cars. They're different than what we look at when it comes to typical. Yeah, both of them. And just like everything about them looks different than like the old school football guy that we're used to seeing. And I feel like people didn't go out of their way. NFL personnel didn't go out of their way to make a whole immaturity thing about Caleb, but Shedeur's not as talented. And so, like, they can lean on that. So I had a big problem with the way that we had talked about him. Now, getting to the football side of this, there's nothing that he does that's elite. He's an average to maybe slightly below average athlete. He's good in the pocket, not elite. I think his ball placement and his accuracy is the best trait that he has. Those are elite qualities. He maybe holds on to the ball too long. I also don't fault him for not pulling the trigger at times, playing behind the offensive line that he played behind. He's very difficult to evaluate from that standpoint. And so for me, the things in his game that I feel like translate to the NFL, I mentioned the ball placement. translates. I mentioned the accuracy, translates. When he had a clean pocket, his ability to go through a read translates. And in the situations where Colorado played in tight games, which they did many times, his ability to operate in a 2-minute offense is very good. And that translates to the NFL. But we're in a day and age where you have to have elite traits. There has to be something about your game, your legs, your big ass arm, or the fact that you are just smarter than every other quarterback has to exist. And he doesn't have all of those to an elite level. And that's how you see him slide out of the first round.
I want to read this quote from my old colleague, Mike Sando at The Athletic, because I thought that it was just like a very blunt and succinct way of recapping this. He said, teams do not think Sanders possesses a strong enough skill set to overcome concerns that he could be difficult to coach. They think Sanders was overhyped because of his pedigree. They think Sanders and his outspoken father would be more likely to get a coach fired than get a coach a new contract. No one was willing to bet his job on Sanders, but someone will select him with a lower stake picks, altering the dynamics. And listen, some of that is what you're talking about the read on him as an interview and all that's around him. But we also always said that if you didn't want to bring all of that, where like if you have lose 3-4 games, and then all of a sudden people are going to be calling for Deion Sanders to be the head coach, or it's going to be a first take topic, then you would pick Jackson Dart.
Right.
And that's what the Giants ended up doing, right? So like if things were close, if things were even, of course that was going to factor into a decision if you're going to be using a first round pick on somebody.
Yeah, and I think like Brian Daboll, great example of a guy who could not bring Shedeur in because of his job security situation, right? Like, and I'm okay with that. That is perfectly fine. And I think that the conversations that people were having about who Shedeur is and his personality, and of course, like it's the whole Nico thing. It's just different where like dad doesn't need to be front and center. Like that has not necessarily been a plan that has helped people. I just wish folks would put their name on the commentary. I just don't like the fact that like they go out of their way to talk poorly about these people, but won't attach their name to it. That's my biggest issue with the way that draft season goes.
It's my least favorite part of the pre-draft process, the nitpicking, but then like the personal attacks that are anonymous. And listen, that started at the combine with Shedeur Sanders. So I hope that he has a great career. Like I hope he is a great pro, because a lot of what we're talking about is outside of his control.
Right.
And I think even the idea that he fell in the draft, I mean, he was the one, when you talk about like media coverage, the way things were framed, we were getting cuts to him. We talked about this about Jalen Milroe, actually, about like him accepting a green room invite. Like, did he know something? Was he like going to stun everyone and be a first round pick? No, but they didn't cut to him all the time.
No.
Like it was not a Will Levis situation. It was not like, oh my God, we got to show him every single time there's a pick. They showed Shedeur more frequently than everyone else at his watch party.
They showed him more than Cam Ward, who went number 1 overall.
They also talked about him like while the Titans were picking Cam Ward.
Like, what are we doing?
There was a lot of that, which was, again, unfair to Shedeur Sanders.
Right.
I will say, like, I watched a lot on NFL Network. They really only brought it up like when the teams that were expected to draft quarterbacks were about to pick. But listen, that's not true on all the feeds, and it still was very much the theme of the first round. And listen, it is the storyline that he did not get drafted in the first round. But I hope he has a great career. I think he's the favorite to be the top pick, the number 1 pick of the second round.
I hope he doesn't go to the Browns for his sake. I mean, no quarterback goes there and good things happen to him. Like that's the risk when you fall, is like, you know, Saints, like let's let that happen. I'd be fine with that. But the Browns, I'm like, oh my God, please no.
I know there's certain organizations that you're like, oh. Same with the Bears, by the way.